And I mentioned in the introduction that you've had so much success in your grant writing applications for nonprofit organizations. I believe more than 60 million US dollars in competitive grant funds. And when a team approaches you for your services in this area, how do you assess if an organization is ready to submit successful grant proposals? And how do you find the appropriate opportunities for them?
Hmm. Such a big, important question. So it definitely sounds like industry jargon, but we call it grant readiness. And so we have a proprietary tool that we released a number of years ago. It's been published in the Grant Professionals Association journal. It's called the GRASP tool. And it's a 10-minute questionnaire that organizations can take, and there's no charge to them for it. And then it gives us an actual metric related to their grant readiness. There in the field have always been different grant readiness checklists or assessments that professionals or consultants will use to assess those big things. Do you understand the value of relationships? Do you have strong procedures in place? Um, do you, think about not just applying for money and creating something because the money's there? Are you applying because it's aligned with your mission? So the tool looks at a wide variety of things, including what I've just outlined, and gives a metric so that organizations can understand, oh, I scored a 52, probably some work to do. Or, oh, yes, I scored an 82. I'm not just ready for foundation grants, I'm probably in a good state for maybe some government grants too. So we use that to help us assess because what we find is that sometimes organizations, they're so passionate and well-meaning that they can't look inward enough to understand what might be a spot that a grant maker would question, that might ultimately decrease their competitiveness. The whole point is if you're going to apply, we want you to spend your time applying in a way where you'll be successful. That goes to your question about how do you find the right opportunities. So if you have the right understanding of your grant readiness, whether it's the staff or the board, if you're scoring in a place where maybe government grants aren't quite right for you yet, well, we're not in the state databases. We're not in grants.gov looking for federal money. We're focusing instead on foundation grants because maybe that's where you're best suited right now. So our team uses a wide variety of tools. There's many that are available. And it just really depends on the type of organization for how you use them to figure out what's best. So tools aside, type of organization aside, when you're doing the grant research, what we find is really helpful to figure out what's best for you is that, I don't know, if I had sunglasses, I'd say take the rose colored sunglasses off, right? You know how sometimes you wear sunglasses and you're like, it's all beautiful. Don't wear those when you're doing grant research. It doesn't help. You want to be very judgmental. Is this really a fit for me? So again, regardless of tool that you're using, whether it's Foundation Directory online or Grant Station, or like I said, there's so many, you find a grant maker that their mission, the reason they exist and they give money, sounds like you. Like, wow, so much like us. It's very parallel. And then you want to look for a grant maker that is looking for potential new funding partners. So there's lots of makers that say that they have funds available, and while their mission might align to yours, they say, we don't accept unsolicited proposals. So my biggest advice when you're in that situation, when you're in the different databases, is when you find those grant makers that say they don't accept unsolicited proposals, put it down, walk away. That's not worth your time. It takes so much relationship development effort in order to get an invitation to even have them consider you. You'd be better spending your time applying to all the others that are willing to accept proposals, still doing relationship development, but you'd be better off spending your time there because they want to see proposals from organizations like you. The others just don't have the capacity or the preference, and so you should set them aside while you develop your grant seeking strategy. So there's a whole lot more in terms of the technical, how do you use the tool and how do you prioritize them on a grant calendar? But I think in terms of universal advice, that's probably the biggest thing I can say.
And once you've found those perfect matches in terms of where you go and seek funding from, what goes into the process of creating successful grant proposals, and who needs to be involved?
Hmm. So each application will look really different because each grant maker, they have a different reason that they exist, so they create the process in a way that works for them. So when you think about, again, some kind of universal advice that works for grant makers, I would say that you remember who you are and what your program design is, and then translate it to the grant maker. Don't create something new in order to complete the application because it's going to be stressful to create it under the pressure of a deadline, and it's going to be very stressful to implement. If you weren't exactly right in what you created, you'll be mission drifting. So when we think about the application, yes, really strongly written narrative is important. But bigger picture, did you tell a story? Did you engage them in your work? Did you give them SMART objectives? Right? So specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. If you don't do that in your objectives, your reviewers have questions. They won't understand what you're measuring or what time period you're presenting this program in. And so when they have questions, they don't want to advocate for you. They don't open their checkbook. They don't write you the grant award. So when we think about then our strong applications, let's go to that team part that you asked about. This is why we use a grant team. You're usually not going to see grant team on an org chart in a nonprofit or in an NGO or a charity, right? You don't find grant team as one of those items in the hierarchy, and that's okay. What a grant team is in our world, it's the group of colleagues that have a stake in seeing the grant be successful. So when we think about who that is, who should be involved to make the application competitive, to have that story written in a way that's successful, you want to have someone from finance that's going to help tell the financial story, make sure your budget has the right items. You want someone from programs. So whether it's a vice president of programs or a program director, but someone that can say what you're proposing is what we want to do. We can do what you're proposing. You should have someone from leadership involved. They're not going to help necessarily write it, but they can say our vision, our mission is this, and the proposal that you're putting forward, it supports that. Ideally, if there's someone in the organization that's focused on evaluation, data collection, data analysis, having them as part of your grant team is really powerful. And then, well, who else? Who would be maybe a fifth person? Grant teams are great if they're between 3 to 9 people, so you might find different people filling multiple roles. It leaves kind of an open space for those that are passionate, those that are engaged in the idea and opt in. They say, I can help, I've got some information. Maybe they really enjoy copy editing or they enjoy writing, they enjoy storytelling. So they have a skill set that's going to come in. And the grant writer, we usually say grant professional because it's so much more than writing, but the grant professional is the one that facilitates that team. And it could be that they facilitate that team for 1 application a year, 12 a year, or that they just have the strategy conversations, like this is what we think we're going to apply for, and then engage different people out of that group as needed. But so when we think grant team, I think dream team, what are the skills that would come together to put together these complicated grant applications that honestly, I mean, you can have a great writer on their own and they'll write wonderful proposals, no doubt. But if you have a great writer and an engaged grant team, you're going to put together proposals that are going to knock it out of the park, that are going to be the ones that get funded. And that's why your success rate goes up and the dollars raised for the organization follow.
Yeah, and I can't help but come back to that 60 plus million that you've helped raise, and it's incredible amounts. So, when you've got the dream team together, what have you found are some simple techniques that grab the attention of the potential funder?
Right? So if we're thinking about how we hook our grant makers, how do we get them engaged? How do we get them to want to either learn more or to say yes? So since each grant maker is reviewing the proposals and making judgment in a different way, some are doing it in a consensus discussion-based way, others, maybe more government style, are scoring it. So it's about a rubric and you're trying to score at the very, very top. So again, as universal as possible, what are some techniques? So this is going to sound like forehead slap style. Answer the question. If a grant maker asks you a question and it should be, bullet number 2, item number 1, answer it. Give them a visual cue of what you're about to answer so that they're not searching for that answer, or they're not saying, What was the goal for that project? I couldn't find it. I read all 10 pages. What was it? So use their application format and their questions and visually create a way that the reviewers, the grant maker, can find that answer. That's what's important to them. That's how they're going to judge you. So you want to make sure they can find it. So that's one tip. Another is to use storytelling, which is a really common technique in other elements of fundraising too. So whether it's that you share a quote from a client or a community member that's received the benefit of your services, or whether it's you go even big picture, broader than that, and instead of being one specific story, you say the application itself is a story. Tell the story of the work you do, of the impact you create. Because if you're not careful and you're answering those questions like I described in tip 1, where you're saying, here's the question, here's the answer, if you're not careful, it feels bland. It feels almost robotic. Here's your question, here's your answer. And yes, I just told you to do that. But on the other hand, make sure that you're telling the whole story, that you're connecting the dots, and that all those questions build so that they understand, they being the grant maker, that they understand why you do what you do. How do you do it? Why are you the best ones? I like to tell people, tell me why you're a rock star. Right? Every nonprofit, every NGO, every charity, they have a reason that they're a rock star. Sometimes they just forget to have that be conveyed in their grant application because they get stuck in tip 1. Answer the question directly. And there's no question that I've found yet from a grant maker that says, why is your organization a rock star? They want you to tell them, but they don't ask it quite that way. So you've got to make your organizational capacity statement, make it exciting. Tell them great things. So those are some of my key tips.